He said, I was too old to matter, so I left my fortune to his ex-wife. I did not even know my own son was launching his fashion line that night. I found out from a newspaper folded on a subway seat, the headline bragging about New York's rising designer, Julian Crail. My son, my blood, my boy who once held my hand crossing icy streets now refused to answer my calls for months. I read that article twice, not because I was proud, though I was, quietly, but because it hurt that everyone else knew before I did. Still, I knitted myself a soft gray sweater, the good yarn, the one I saved for special days. I told myself he must have forgotten to tell me in the rush of things. People get busy, success is loud. Mothers become background noises. That was what I repeated as I walked 10 blocks in the cold wind, just to see him shine. The moment I stepped into the venue, a dim lounge filled with glossy tables and people who smelled like new money, every conversation seemed to stop for half a second. Not long enough to be rude, but long enough for me to feel something tug inside my chest. I kept my hands clasped together to hide the shaking. Not fear, just age. Age has a way of trembling even when the heart stands steady. I spotted Julian at the VIP table, laughing beside his girlfriend, Serena Hale, a woman whose beauty looked like something curated rather than born. I took a breath, straightened my sweater, and walked toward them, my steps careful, rehearsed. I had imagined this moment while knitting every thread of that sweater. He would smile, stand up, hug me, say he was glad I came. But reality arrived faster than hope. Serena's eyes slid toward me first, sharp and assessing. "Who's that?" she said loudly, turning to her friend, Marcy Vale. "Why is someone's grandmother wandering around like she's lost?" Marcy didn't even pretend to lower her voice. "Did she walk in from the street? She looks like she's here to fetch plates." My cheeks burned, but I kept walking. A mother learns long ago to keep moving even when the world wants her still and silent. Then Julian looked up. For a moment, half a heartbeat, I saw the boy he used to be. The one who cried when he cracked his front tooth, the one who brought me dandelions in old pickle jars. But the softness vanished the instant he noticed what I was wearing. "Mom, seriously?" he snapped. "You came dressed like that? People are trying to eat." The table chuckled. I felt their amusement, how easy it was for them to laugh at someone they did not consider part of the room. I swallowed. "I just wanted to congratulate you, sweetheart." Serena tilted her head, pretending confusion. "She's shaking. Is she sick or just old?" Julian didn't defend me. He didn't even flinch. He just leaned back in his chair and said, "You shouldn't hover around the table. People think you're waiting for leftovers." My breath caught. Not because the words were cruel, I have heard crueler things in my life, but because he said them so casually, so comfortably, as if cruelty toward me were a language he had become fluent in. A man behind me murmured to his date, "New York is crawling with seniors who think they're still relevant." I pretended not to hear, even though it pierced through my bones like cold rain. I took one small step back from the table, trying to gather myself, when Serena leaned closer to Julian and whispered, "Why is she even here?" Julian didn't hesitate. He didn't soften his voice. He didn't shield me from the blow. "At her age," he said, "she's barely part of the present. Why make herself part of my future?" The table laughed again, sharp, small, heartless. I stood there, absorbing those words with the stillness I learned from a lifetime of bending so others could stand taller. I felt the old ache, the familiar one, the one that lives beneath the ribs of women who raised ungrateful children. It doesn't scream. It glows quietly like an ember, burning without flames. I opened my mouth, hoping maybe I could remind him that I was the one who mended his shirts for school, who used to stay up at night repairing clothing for strangers just to earn enough for his piano lessons, who once walked through a storm because he forgot his homework. But the words caught. Pride is sometimes a stone, too heavy to lift. Around the 200th word mark of my humiliation, I felt a different instinct rise in me, not pride, not sorrow, but witness. There are moments in life when someone else's cruelty becomes too loud to hide. This was one of them. So, if you who are listening feel that justice deserves to be heard, if stories like this should travel far beyond the rooms where we are silenced, then smash that hype button. Let these truths echo as far as they need to. Your support keeps voices like mine from vanishing in the noise. Thank you, sweetheart. Keep listening. I tried to smile again, tried to place a hand on Julian's shoulder, but he shifted away from me so violently the gesture fell into empty air. Please, he hissed under his breath. Don't make a scene. You always do this. You show up where you don't belong, where I don't belong. My son had built an entire life on the foundation of my sacrifices, yet in his world, the person who carried him into it no longer had a place. Serena pressed a manicured hand to her chest. Honestly, Julian, she's adorable, but maybe she should sit at one of the side tables. Somewhere. Comfortable. Comfortable. A polite way of saying invisible. I nodded because there are moments when resistance becomes another wound. But before I could speak, Marcy chimed in. She really does look lost. Should someone guide her to the exit? The exit. I felt my pulse slow, not from panic, but from clarity. Every woman my age knows this moment, the one where you realize people no longer see you as central, or helpful, or even human, but as something disposable, a shadow. I steadied my hands. I won't stay long, I whispered. I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you. Julian didn't soften, didn't acknowledge the tremor in my voice, didn't remember the nights I stayed awake sewing gowns for women who had nothing just so he could have a clean uniform. He just folded his arms and said, next time call, or maybe, don't. There it was, the erasure spoken aloud. A son rejecting not just his mother, but the part of himself tied to me. I stepped back, letting the noise of the room grow around me like a tide I was no longer part of. In that crowded, glittering space, filled with people wearing clothes I once repaired for free, I felt myself shrink to the edges, not because I was small, but because they needed me to be. As the music swelled and cameras flashed around his new brand sign CRAILE, my name hidden inside his success, I realized something quietly devastating. He had become everything the world applauded, and I had become everything it ignored. I stood there, a mother in a hand-knitted sweater, watching the son I raised erase me with every polished smile. And that was how the night began. People like to pretend that cruelty begins in a single moment, some sharp event that splits the past from the present. But with Julian, the cruelty was a slow drip, one that began long before he grew tall enough to look down on me. It began in that basement where I worked, the one with pipes that rattled when the building exhaled, the one that smelled of old cotton, damp concrete, and the ache of women who came to me when they had nowhere else to go. I used to repair clothes in that basement. I patched torn sleeves, resewed loose hems, and altered dresses so gently worn that they had forgotten what it felt like to belong to a body that walked with confidence. Many of the women who came to me were running from husbands who broke more than bones. They brought the only outfits they had left: a blouse with a ripped shoulder, a uniform dress stained by a night they could not speak about. I mended what I could, and when they reached for their wallets, I pushed their hands away. I did not charge them. How could I? They needed the clothes to find jobs, to attend court hearings, to stand in front of strangers and ask the world to give them a chance again. Kindness was the only wealth I possessed, and I used every bit of it. But in the eyes of the neighborhood, that kindness was suspicious. People whispered that poor women who helped other poor women were asking for trouble. That compassion was a sign of weakness, or dirtiness, or some intention too low for polite company. I remember one neighbor, a woman named Darlene, who never lowered her voice for anyone. She stood in the hallway with her arms folded and said to another tenant, "She repairs clothes for abused women? No wonder her son grows up strange." They both laughed, the kind of laugh that makes your skin feel thin. I heard Julian behind me as he tightened his grip on my sleeve. Even then, he was learning to absorb shame that did not belong to him. I told him to ignore them, but children absorb tone faster than words. And in our building, the tone toward me was always the same: sharp, cautious, condescending, as if helping broken people made me broken too. Adrian's family didn't help. My former mother-in-law made it clear she never wanted her son marrying a woman who worked with her hands. She believed those who touched fabric for money were meant to stay in the background of life. One afternoon, when Julian was still small enough to hide behind my skirt, she looked me in the eyes and said, "You were so poor when Adrian met you. My son marrying you was like cutting his own road in half. He could have risen farther with someone else." The words weren't for me, they were for Julian, a seed planted early in the soil of his mind. She kept feeding it, watering it with judgment, until he began to believe that I was the reason his father struggled, the reason his father died too young, the reason their family name was not carved into higher places. When Adrian passed, the whispers grew bolder. People said things within Julian's earshot like, if he hadn't worked so hard to keep her afloat, he'd still be here. It didn't matter that Adrian worked because he wanted to give us a life. Grief twists facts, and the neighborhood twisted everything into a story where I was the anchor that dragged the man down. As Julian grew older, he clung to those stories. He admired wealthy philanthropists, the ones who donated money on televised galas and got praised for compassion I had offered quietly for years. He would point at them on magazine covers and say, "That's real generosity, Mom. That's class." But when he saw me give away repaired coats to women shivering on park benches, his face tightened. "Do you have to do that in public?" he'd whisper, glancing around to see who was watching. To him, my kindness wasn't admirable, it was embarrassing. A poor woman helping poorer women. Nothing glamorous. Nothing worth applause. The kids at his school made it worse. Children sense shame like wolves sense blood. They sniffed out the basement smell clinging to my clothes. They saw my hands, rough from stitching. They mocked Julian for it. I remember overhearing one boy say, "Your mom smells like basement laundry. My dog smells nicer." The laughter was sharp enough to bruise. Julian pretended it didn't bother him, but at home he slammed his door hard enough to rattle the frame. I tried to be present, but survival steals hours, the way shame steals childhood. I worked from dawn to midnight, missing school events not from lack of love but necessity, yet children only noticed the empty seat, never the hands paying for their books. One evening, while I was repairing a coat for a woman escaping violence, Julian appeared in the doorway, small and trembling, and for the first time his voice rose not in anger, but in hurt. "Why do you always help strangers but never show up for me the way they need you?" He didn't say the way I need you. He said the way they need you, as if his needs were an afterthought, as if strangers mattered more. I wanted to tell him that helping those women was my way of ensuring he grew up in a world that showed mercy. But explaining mercy to a child drowning in humiliation is like trying to describe sunlight to someone standing in the dark. He turned away before I could say anything. Julian slowly learned to view my kindness as incompetence, my poverty as failure, my sacrifices as proof that he deserved something better than me. And by the time he entered high school, he had mastered the art of hiding me. He stopped inviting friends over. He avoided introducing me to teachers. When ceremonies came around, he made excuses for why I shouldn't attend. "You'll be tired, Mom," he would say. "You don't have to come." But beneath the politeness was a truth sharp enough to wound. He did not want to be seen beside me. Years later, when he dismissed me at his glamorous launch as if I were an inconvenience, I understood it hadn't happened suddenly. His cruelty had been planted in childhood, fed by whispers, insults, and the shame he absorbed because I wasn't the mother others expected. He rewrote his past, so I became the cause of his humiliation, not the woman who worked herself raw for him. That night in New York, the truth settled in me. Kindness had been my strength, but to Julian it was my flaw, the sin he wanted to outrun. His contempt wasn't born from who I was, but from what the world taught him I was worth. It didn't break me, it clarified me. Adrian Lacour was not a cruel man. He married me knowing exactly who I was, elbow deep in thread, fabric pins between my teeth, and calloused fingers that told every story my life had carved into them. He used to watch me mend clothes with a kind of quiet reverence, like I was stitching something sacred instead of repairing a jacket worn thin by a winter too harsh for the man who owned it. He would sit on the basement steps after his shift, loosen his tie, and say, "You have a way with broken things, Elowen. You make them believe they were never broken at all. What I didn't know then was that he carried those words into the fashion world. Before liqueur became a symbol of expensive elegance before the glossy editorials and the displays under glass, the brand was nothing more than Adrian's belief in what my hands could do. He brought home fabric scraps from his job in a garment warehouse and placed them in my lap like offerings. "Try this," he would say. "See what comes to you." And I would. I added shape where the fabric sagged, softened harsh angles, reworked proportions the way other women reworked recipes. Adrian collected every little sketch and scrap I left behind, treating them like prototypes. I thought he was only admiring me. I didn't know he was building something out of what I created. Years later, after his death, I found out the truth in an office that smelled faintly of polished wood and exhaustion. Grant Ellison, Adrian's longtime lawyer, sat across from me. He was older now, his hair silver at the temples, but his voice carried a sincerity I had rarely heard from anyone related to the liqueur legacy. He took off his glasses, folded his hands, and looked at me with an expression that made the room feel too still. "Miss Crail," he said quietly, "there is something Adrian asked me to tell you one day, but he never found the courage to say it himself." He reached into a drawer and placed a thin folder in front of me. "Your husband said your hands were the beginning of everything he built. He regretted letting the world assume he did it alone." For a moment I couldn't breathe. The truth struck with a force both tender and devastating. Inside the folder were sketches. My sketches. The rounded shoulders, the asymmetrical folds, the soft slash neckline I shaped for women who needed strength. Adrian had taken them, refined them, and built a legacy the world applauded. But he never told them who created the first breath of it. I didn't feel anger, only the weight of his hidden guilt and the quiet grief of seeing my work travel the world without my name. Then Naomi Everhart entered, a living echo of my past, the 19-year-old I once helped, trembling in a torn dress. I repaired it and told her the same thing I told every woman who stepped into my basement with her dignity hanging by a thread. Clothes don't change people, but confidence does. At the time I thought she had nodded out of politeness. But now she stood tall, wearing a blazer she designed herself, her name beginning to rise in the New York fashion world. She reached for my hands, and her voice wavered. "I built my life on that sentence," she said. "And the industry that praises Julian? The reason I survived long enough to enter it was you." I didn't know what to say. Naomi squeezed my fingers gently. "Julian never knew any of this, did he?" I shook my head. He had spent years seeing me only as a burden, a reminder of the poverty he wanted erased. If he had known the foundation of his brand came from the woman he mocked and cropped out of photographs, he might have rewritten his story, but he never asked, and eventually he stopped caring. When I left that office, the air felt different, not lighter, just honest. I was not the invisible woman he treated like clutter. I had been the quiet seam beneath his empire, stitching confidence into women who had nothing. And the bitter irony was this: the world finally knew my name, while the son who owed me love never wanted to learn it. Julian waited for the applause to fade before yanking me aside. He never touched my arm. He would never risk wrinkling his suit, but the gesture carried the weight of dragging something unwanted out of view. He rushed me down a narrow hallway lined with his new collection, every piece displayed like a trophy he believed he'd earned alone. Not once did he look back to see if I could keep up. In a small private room meant for executives, he shut the door behind us. The space felt less like a lounge and more like a cell. Julian stood rigid by the table, jaw clenched, fingers tapping beside a stack of papers laid out with surgical hostility. "These need your signature," he said without preamble. I moved closer and read the title at the top. "Waiver of Beneficiary Rights." Another page. "Relinquishment of Intellectual Contribution Claims." Another. "Statement of Non-Involvement in Liqueur Founding Narrative." I felt cold. "Julian, what is this?" He didn't bother softening his tone. "What it looks like." Before I could speak again, the door opened behind me. Serena Hale slipped in, her perfume arriving a second before she did. She walked with the easy confidence of someone who believed every room should bend toward her. Her eyes skimmed over me like I was lint on furniture she planned to replace. A luxury house cannot have a founder who looks like she belongs in the discount craft aisle, she said, each word coated in sugar and poison. She didn't even sit. She didn't need to. The room already belonged to her. Julian flipped one of the papers toward me. "These documents protect me," he said. "Your name complicates the brand image." Brand image. Not family. Not legacy. Not truth. Brand image. The same boy who once cried when he couldn't thread a needle now spoke with the arrogance of a man who believed he had threaded the entire world. "I am not trying to hurt you," he added, though his tone contradicted every syllable. "But people don't want a brand with a backstory like yours." I looked at him carefully, trying to understand the son I had raised. He straightened his cuffs, waiting for me to comply, as if my silence were nothing but a signing pen he had to uncap. "Julian," I whispered, "you want me to erase myself from your history?" He shrugged lightly. "You were never truly part of the industry. You just existed nearby. This is cleaning up the narrative." Serena crossed her arms. "Besides, these contracts are standard. Every real luxury house controls its origin story." Origin story. My stitches, my patterns, my basement, my sweat-soaked effort, my years of holding a family together with thread and willpower, and now, with a single room, 2 signatures, and a lie, I was supposed to sign away the only truth I had left. Julian slid a pen toward me. "Let's be efficient about this." I didn't touch it. That slight hesitation was all he needed to lose whatever patience he had pretended to keep. His voice rose sharp, unfiltered, simmering with anger he had clearly held for years. "You're a burden I've carried long enough." The words struck directly at a place I thought had scarred over long ago. Because they were not new. They were not even his. They were the exact words his grandmother, Adrian's mother, once spat at me the day she learned her son was marrying a poor seamstress. A burden I've carried long enough. Hearing them again, from my own child, felt like being pushed back in time. Back to the nights when I stood in the kitchen, listening to her call me worthless. Back to the mornings when I worked in a freezing basement to prove her wrong. Back to the evenings when Adrian defended me with one hand, while quietly building a brand on the other that I would never receive credit for. I steadied myself. "Julian," I said softly, "do you hear yourself?" He rolled his eyes. "Do not make this dramatic." "You're asking your own mother," I said, "to sign away her existence." Serena scoffed. "Oh, please. No one is erasing her. She was never part of the story to begin with." Julian didn't correct her. He didn't even blink. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, dense with history he had never bothered to understand, and sacrifice he had never taken the time to see. I looked at the papers again. Not one of them had a space for my name in acknowledgement. Only removal, only absence, only deletion. "I won't sign these," I said. Julian inhaled, sharply offended. "Why not? It's not like it changes anything. You've never mattered to the brand." I felt the sting, but I did not let it break me. Not here, not now. He pressed the pen into the table so hard the metal clicked. "If you wanted dignity," he snapped, "you should have earned it somewhere other than a basement." Serena smirked. Maybe she thinks knitting makes her a legacy. For the first time that night, my voice held steel. "Julian," I said, "sometimes the things built in basements last longer than the things built in showrooms." He laughed, a small, dismissive sound, yet underneath it something shifted, not in him but in me. He thought age had softened me, thought I would sign anything to keep the peace, thought I was too worn to fight back. He had no idea how much of Lacour's bloodline lived in my hands, or how his cruelty in that cramped room was the first crack in the empire he worshipped, a crack that would only widen. I was staring at the papers he pushed toward me when the door opened, and Naomi stepped in. One look at my face, humiliation mixed with exhaustion, and she walked straight to me, ignoring Julian and Serena entirely. "Eloin," she said gently, "come with me." "I've been waiting for the right moment," she whispered, her jaw set with a quiet determination. "And after what he just tried to do to you, I'm done waiting." Julian scoffed. "She isn't going anywhere. She hasn't signed. Naomi turned on him with a calm, sharp look I had never seen her use before. "She doesn't owe you a signature," she said, "and she doesn't owe you her silence either." Julian opened his mouth to argue, but Naomi didn't give him the dignity of a pause. She took my hand, small gesture, enormous weight, and led me out of the room before either of them could react. As we walked through the back hallway, my knees weakened, not from age but from the sudden release of tension that had held them rigid. Naomi didn't let go of my hand until we reached the elevator, and when the doors closed, she finally spoke. "I should have done this earlier," she said. "Grant needs to talk to you right now." "Grant?" I repeated. "Why?" Naomi hesitated just long enough to worry me. "Because there are things Adrian left behind, things you were never told." My pulse quickened. "About LaCour?" She nodded, and as the elevator rose, I felt a familiar ache in my chest. Hope, fear, unanswered questions that had lived in me for years. When the doors opened, Grant Ellison was already waiting in a quiet conference room. He stood when I entered, not out of obligation, but respect, something I had forgotten the weight of. He motioned for me to sit. On the table lay a thick folder, older than Julian's entire career. "Miss Crail," he began, adjusting his glasses, "I believe it's time you knew the truth about your position in LaCour." I folded my hands to steady them. "I thought I had no position." A soft, empathetic sadness crossed his face. "That's what the public was led to believe. But it isn't the truth Adrian left behind." He opened the folder. The papers inside were yellowed around the edges, but the signatures were unmistakable. Adrian's handwriting bold, slanted, confident, and next to it, in careful block letters, "Mine." I frowned. "I don't remember signing anything like this." "You didn't," Grant said. "These are duplicates. The originals were signed by Adrian alone, granting you the rights you should have had from the beginning." He slid one page toward me. "This is the document naming you a co-founder by contribution." My breath caught. The room blurred for a moment, and all I could think of were the nights in the basement, sewing until my fingers hurt too much to bend. The sketches Adrian had praised quietly, but never shared. The dresses he took inspiration from without telling me where they went afterward. The admiration in his eyes that never made it to the public story. "Adrian meant to tell you," Grant said softly. "But the brand grew too quickly, and he feared the world would question him if they knew the original vision began in a basement, not a boardroom." I closed my eyes. Years of silence, years of being dismissed. All while my work was stitched into the foundation of the empire Julian claimed as his birthright. Grant continued, turning the next page. "This document grants you voting rights, significant ones, and this," he tapped another sheet, "gives you intervention authority over any misuse of the LaCour legacy." Intervention authority. I stared at him. "Meaning?" "Meaning," Grant said, leaning forward. "Your son cannot legally erase you. He cannot alter the founding story without your consent. He cannot push you out of the brand. And he absolutely cannot force you to sign documents relinquishing what is, by law, already yours." It felt as if the ground shifted beneath me, only this time it was not from falling, but from rising. Naomi sat beside me, her voice warm but fierce. "You are not a footnote, Miss Crail. You're the first paragraph." I felt my eyes sting. "Julian will never believe this." "He doesn't have to," Grant replied. "The law already does." I looked at the papers, each one a truth I had been denied, each one a piece of myself returning to me after years of being stripped away. In that moment, the ache in my bones, the shame from the gala, the cruelty in Julian's voice, it all fell into place. He hadn't pushed me aside because I was irrelevant. He had pushed me aside because he had no idea how much power I still held. Naomi rested a hand on my shoulder. "Julian climbed using ladders you built with bleeding fingers. He just never looked down." The words struck deep. Not cruelly, truthfully. I took a long breath. "What do I do now?" Grant pointed to the final document in the folder, clean, current, waiting. "This," he said, "is a reinstatement. Signing it activates all rights Adrian granted you. Every vote, every authority, every piece of ownership you were meant to have. My hands trembled, not with fear but with something long overdue. I picked up the pen. For once, I wasn't signing a waiver. I wasn't erasing myself. I wasn't shrinking to fit a version of the world Julian demanded. I was stepping back into a legacy that had always been mine. The pen touched paper. And for the first time in my life, my signature didn't feel like surrender. It felt like power. The Liqueur boardroom was a place I never expected to enter. A glass fortress built for people who believed the world owed them its gaze. People like Julian, people I once served from the shadows. But today felt different, because I wasn't walking in as someone's mother or burden. I was entering as a legally recognized co-founder, finally claiming the place I had earned. The chatter died the moment I stepped inside. Some board members whispered, some straightened, a few glanced nervously at Julian. He stood at the head of the table, portfolio in hand, Serena beside him. But when she saw me walk in fully, her confident smile snapped out like a light extinguished. "Elowen?" she breathed, her voice cracking. "Why is she, Julian? Why is she here?" Julian turned. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like someone had pulled the life out of him with invisible thread. His jaw tightened, his throat bobbed once, and then his expression twisted into the same disdain he had used on me my entire life. "You have no right to be here," he snapped. Grant entered behind me. "She has every right," he corrected sharply, "legally and contractually." The board members looked between us, confusion rippling like a quiet quake. I walked to an empty chair, but I did not sit. My legs were steady, my voice even steadier. "Julian," I said calmly, "you may begin your presentation. I would like to hear how you plan to lead the company I helped build." He slammed the folder shut. "You think this is funny?" he hissed. "You ruined my life because you couldn't stay invisible like you were supposed to." The words ricocheted through the room. Even Serena flinched. Invisible, like I was supposed to. There it was, the truth he had never bothered to hide, only to polish. The belief that I existed merely to support him quietly, secretly, endlessly. The belief that mothers, especially poor mothers, were meant to be background noise. I stepped forward, letting the silence stretch just enough to make him squirm. "No, Julian," I said, voice low, steady, and irreversibly firm. "You ruined your own life by thinking I didn't matter." He made an incredulous sound, half laugh, half snarl. "Do not lecture me. You spent decades in a basement. You don't belong in this room." "And yet," I answered, meeting his eyes without blinking, "here I am." His cheeks flushed with anger. He took a step toward me, ignoring the board, ignoring Serena's panic, ignoring the fact that every camera in the room recorded his every word. "You think signing one paper changes anything?" he spat. "You think you can just walk into Liqueur as if you built it? You don't know anything about sacrifice, about business, about climbing your way up." I held his gaze. "You spent years pretending I wasn't part of your story, but the truth is simple." I raised my chin, my voice carrying across the room. "You existed because I worked. You rose because I bent. And you fell because you finally pushed the wrong woman." The room froze. Julian opened his mouth, but nothing came out. No insult, no defense. Only breath caught in his throat, as if the words had knocked the wind out of him. Serena stepped closer to him, whispering urgently, "Julian, do something, stop her, say something." But he couldn't. Not now. Not in front of the people who suddenly saw the truth. Not the image he crafted, but the fracture beneath it. I turned to the board members, opening the file Grant had given me. "These are the reinstated documents confirming my position as co-founder and my voting authority. I am exercising those rights today." Gasps flickered around the table. Serena's voice cracked. "You can't. This is Julian's company. He's the face. He's the brand." "No," I said quietly. "Liqueur is more than a face, more than a brand. It is legacy. And I will not let my life's work be destroyed by arrogance or lies." I looked directly at the chairwoman of the board. I am calling for a formal vote to remove Julian Crail from the position of CEO, effective immediately. The room erupted. Serena lunged forward, grabbing Julian's arm. Say something! Fight her! She can't do this! Tell them she's delusional, Julian! But Julian was frozen, staring at me. At the woman he had spent his life trying to erase, the woman he had underestimated, the woman who now held the one thing he never thought he'd lose: authority. The chairwoman cleared her throat. Given the legal documentation presented, the board will proceed with the vote. Julian finally found his voice, but it came out choked. You can't do this to me, Mom. I stopped him with a single look. I am not doing anything to you, I said. I am correcting what you tried to do to me. The votes came swiftly. One by one, hands lifted around the table. When it was done, the chairwoman announced the decision with a tone that held no pity. Julian Crail is hereby removed from the position of CEO of Liqueur. Serena gasped, as if someone had slapped her. Julian staggered back, hands trembling. I stood still, steady, rooted in a truth he could no longer deny. For the first time in his life, he was facing the consequences of his own cruelty. Julian lurched forward, his voice cracking as he grabbed the edge of the table, trying to steady himself. You're all making a mistake, he said, forcing a laugh that trembled at the edges. I built this. I kept us afloat. You can't let her. But the board members avoided his eyes. Some looked down at their documents, others stared straight ahead. For the first time in his life, Julian realized that no amount of charm or pressure could save him. Not here. Not now. And for the first time in mine, I wasn't the one bending. The boardroom victory should have felt triumphant, but when the elevator doors closed behind me, all I felt was the hollow thud of my own heartbeat. Power does not come naturally to women like me. It arrives like a stranger at the doorstep, unexpected, unsettling, and carrying questions no one taught me how to answer. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, the cold New York wind cut across my face. For a moment, the city blurred. Not because of age, not because of exhaustion, but because a thought struck me so sharply, it nearly made me sit down right there on the curb. Had I gone too far? The question echoed in my ribs, louder than the applause that had once filled that gleaming showroom. Power unsettles the hands of women who were taught to fold themselves small. The image of Julian's face, red, shaking, humiliated, would not leave me. I could still hear the crack in his voice as he said, You can't do this to me, Mom. I had waited my entire life to hear him call me Mom without bitterness. I never imagined the word would be drenched in desperation. For a heartbeat, I wanted to run back upstairs and say I was sorry, that I did not mean for it to unravel this way, that I never wanted to be the source of his downfall, only the parent who helped him stand straighter. But then another image rose, uninvited Julian at 6 years old, curled against my chest after his first nightmare, tiny arms wrapped around my neck, whispering, Don't ever leave me. Mom. He used to cling to me, like I was the only safe place he had, and I held him with everything in me, believing love alone could protect a child from the world. Yet somewhere between that small boy and the man who spat venom at me in a crowded ballroom, something broke. Something I had not noticed because I was too busy surviving, too tired to see that his heart had begun to twist in ways even a mother's love could not untangle. As I walked home, the question dug deeper. Was I punishing him for the years he spent despising me? Or was I finally defending myself after a lifetime of being too gentle? When I reached my apartment, an envelope was waiting under my door. My name, my full name, was written in a delicate, careful hand. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Naomi. My breath caught as I opened the letter. Elowen, it began, you once stitched a seam in my blouse after I escaped a home that nearly destroyed me. You told me, clothes don't change people, but confidence does. You gave me the confidence to rebuild myself. You stitched fabric, but you mended lives. Mine was the first. I pressed a hand to my chest. The rest of the letter was a quiet, fierce reminder of who I had been long before Julian learned to hate me. I had spent decades repairing not only garments, but women who needed one small kindness to believe they were worth more than their pain. I had given without keeping score, listened without judgment, worked until my hands ached because someone needed the help I could offer. Somewhere along the way, Julian had twisted those deeds into crimes. But Naomi's letter untangled that knot inside me. She wrote, "Do not confuse standing up for yourself with harming someone else. You did not ruin Julian. You simply stopped allowing him to ruin you." My eyes stung as I read the final lines again and again, letting them soak into the deepest, most wounded parts of me. You are not the weapon in his story, Elowen. For the first time, you are the shield for your own. I sat in my small kitchen, Naomi's letter trembling in my hand, the heater humming softly. In that quiet, something inside me finally eased. I hadn't destroyed my son's life. I had only stepped out from beneath the burden he shaped me into. Julian always had choices, and he chose the version of himself that treated me like something disposable, a shadow he could blame. I didn't break his world. I simply stopped holding it up. For the first time in decades, I breathed without guilt. Maybe I had lost my son long ago, grieving him without knowing. But I had found something I never expected at my age myself, and that, at last, was enough. I had spent most of my life believing that old women should slip quietly into the background, settling their affairs in modest envelopes that no one bothered to open until long after the funeral. But the morning I walked into Grant Ellison's office to rewrite my will, I felt none of that timid resignation. I felt clarity, the kind that arrives only after a lifetime of being underestimated. Grant looked up from his desk as I entered, his expression softening. "Miss Crail," he said, "you're early." "I have lived my whole life late to everything," I replied. "This part I want to do right on time." He gestured for me to sit, and I laid a folder in front of him, my shares, my rights, the paperwork Adrian left behind that no one expected me to keep, the documents that Julian tried to bury under his own arrogance. For a moment, Grant simply stared at the stack. "You understand," he said quietly. "This is the entire backbone of LaCour." "I understand," I said, steady, "and I am ready to place that backbone where it actually belongs." He waited. I took a slow breath and spoke the sentence I had rehearsed all night. "I want every share, every right, every ounce of authority transferred to Naomi Everhart." Grant blinked. "Naomi, Julian's ex-wife? She was never cruel to me," I said. "She was never ashamed of me, and she survived a kind of loneliness I recognize. She will use this gift to build something that does not crush people to climb higher." Grant nodded once, a solemn acknowledgement of my choice. Then he began drafting the will. When he slid the final document toward me, I read the opening lines, my own words staring back at me. "I gave without keeping count. You took without looking back. Now life corrects its balance." The pen felt light in my hand, lighter than regret, lighter than grief. I signed. Hours later, as I stepped out of the building, Julian appeared on the sidewalk like a storm that had lost its thunder. His eyes were swollen, his breath uneven. For the first time since he was a child, he looked small. "Mom," he said, voice cracking, "please, do not do this. Do not give it to her. I can fix it. I can fix everything." It struck me then this man who had never once apologized for humiliating me now held out his hands like someone drowning. But I had been the shore for him too many times. And each time he reached land, he blamed me for the water. "It is too late, Julian," I said softly. He stepped closer, shaking his head. "I'll change. I will. I swear it. Just give me a chance." I wished, for a brief, painful heartbeat, that his words had come years earlier, when he still believed I mattered, when I still believed he could see me. But now he was begging not for forgiveness, not for relationship, but for ownership. "You're only here because of what you lost," I said, "not because of what I mean." He opened his mouth, but no words followed. "Naomi will build something better than you ever could," I continued. "Not because she's younger or louder, but because she knows how to treat people like they're human." His face twisted. "She despises me," he whispered. "No," I said. "She survived you. There is a difference." He realized then that I meant every word, that the will was final, that the empire he believed was his birthright had slipped entirely out of his reach. He took one last step toward me. What am I supposed to do now? For the first time in my life, I did not shrink before his pain. I did not bend to make him feel taller. I simply told the truth. You learn, I said, the way the rest of us had to. He lowered his gaze, and for a moment I saw the boy he once was, the boy who clung to me after nightmares. But in the man standing before me, there was none of that innocence left. I touched his arm, lightly, like a farewell gesture. Goodbye, Julian. I walked away before he could cry or curse or beg again. The city hummed around me, but inside I felt a stillness as clean as new fabric. As I reached the corner, the final sentence of my will echoed in my mind, clear and sharp, a truth carved from years of being dismissed. The day he said I was too old to matter was the day he learned age has nothing to do with power. And kindness, when pushed too far, grows a spine sharper than any blade. And for the first time, I felt something I had not tasted in decades. Peace. Thank you, sweetheart, for staying with me through this journey. If you want more stories where truth stands tall, where resilience finds its voice, and where justice at long last gets the ending it deserves, then I would love for you to stay close. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories, a place where wisdom grows louder, where forgotten lives are honored, and where every tale carries the heartbeat of someone who refused to disappear. Thank you for listening, dear one. Until the next story, stay gentle, stay brave, and take good care of your heart.